It's the first Christmas night. Having traveled hundreds of miles for many days, 3 wise kings from the east have come to Bethlehem, following a bright star in the sky. They know this star signifies the coming of the new king of Israel. In a small barn, a family, Joseph, Mary, and their new baby Jesus, are surrounded by shepherds and their animals, who have just witnessed the miracle of Jesus' birth. The 3 kings come to join the group and offer gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and they pay homage to Jesus, recognizing him as Christ, the Messiah. At least, that's the story we are told on Christmas Day, but this picture is not quite right. According to the original tale told in the Gospel of Matthew, the 3 wise men didn't come until after Jesus was born. Traditionally, it is thought that they showed up after 12 days, hence the 12 days of Christmas. Also, the story of the shepherds worshiping Jesus isn't mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew, but in the Gospel of Luke. And that does happen on the night of Jesus' birth. The combination of these events in the traditional nativity scene is a convenient artistic convention. Okay, what else is wrong? Well, how many wise men were there? The Gospel account states, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem." There is no mention of the number of wise men. In the Western Christian tradition, it's assumed there are 3, matching the number of gifts, which seems reasonable to me. But in many parts of the Eastern Christian world, there are thought to have been 12 wise men. Okay, the wise men didn't show up on Christmas Day, and we don't know how many there were. But hang on, there's one more problem. Since when were they called kings? While the 3 gift givers in the Christmas story are often called kings, there is no indication that they are rulers of any kind in the gospel narrative. The supposition of their royalty started appearing in the 3rd or 4th centuries. Experts assume they started to be referred to as kings because of passages in the Old Testament, specifically in the books of Isaiah and Psalms. "The Gentiles shall come to your light, and the kings to the brightness of your rising. The kings of Tarshish and of the isles shall bring presents. The kings of Sheba and Seba shall bring gifts." This characterization of them as kings continued into the medieval period, and in many respects continues today. The kings were even given names and countries of origin, which they presumably were rulers of. Depending on the tradition, their names changed, but the Western Church eventually settled on Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar. Melchior is usually depicted as an old, white-haired king of Persia. Caspar is middle-aged, and is usually said to be king of India, and lastly, Balthazar is a young, dark-skinned man and a king of Arabia, though in later traditions is commonly said to be an Ethiopian king. I should point out that all of this is just the most common interpretation. What the kings' names are, their ages, and places of origins are all pretty malleable because, well, it's all made up. While all of these conventions and traditions are interesting, it falls on me to point out that they are all wrong, or at the very least completely unfounded. For one, the men weren't kings. Clearly they were men of some importance, as they do visit King Herod before visiting Jesus, and not just anyone could get an audience with the king after all, but the gospel doesn't say that they are royalty of any kind. Secondly, they aren't from separate kingdoms. When they leave Judea, the Bible says, "They departed for their own country," singular, another way. So okay, who were these men? Well, it's actually not hard to figure out. In most English translations of the Gospel, the men are referred to as wise men. But if we look to the original Greek, we see the word used is Magi. Magi was the name given to Zoroastrian priests. Zoroastrianism was a major religion in the ancient world, practiced mostly in Persia, which at this point was part of the Parthian Empire. Its founder, the prophet Zoroaster, sometimes called Zarathustra, taught that there was one supreme god, named Ahura Mazda, meaning wise lord, and one evil entity named Angra Mainyu. These two deities were said to be in a constant lock struggle, good versus evil, and the message of Zoroaster and his later followers was to always take the side of good, of Ahura Mazda. As you can probably see, this sort of cosmology was very influential to Christian theology, and helped promote the devil, a character rarely seen or even discussed in Judaism, and make him a central figure in Christianity. Anyway, in the Greek-speaking world, Magi were quite well respected as sages, and above all else, astrologers, which makes sense as the biblical Magi were said to have followed a star to Jesus. This respect for Magi may well be why they are included in the Gospel account, though there is probably more to it than that. See, the writers of the Gospels were very well acquainted with the Old Testament scriptures, and made constant references to them. This story in the Gospel of Matthew is making reference to the book of Numbers, the fourth book of the Hebrew Bible. In Numbers, there is a character called Balaam. He is a priest and a diviner from Persia hired by the Moabites, a tribe of people blocking the Jews from the Promised Land. He is ordered to set a curse on the Israelites, but Balaam doesn't do that. After he has a vision from the God of Abraham, Balaam blesses the Israelites instead and gives a prophecy. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel. So the author of the Gospel of Matthew is asserting that these Magi are coming to fulfill that prophecy. Also, many medieval theologians, like St. Ambrose, linked the Magi with Balaam. They saw the Zoroastrian Magi as coming from the same tradition as Balaam. In fact, some Christians claimed that Balaam and Zoroaster were actually one and the same, though this was not a majority opinion. So, those were the wise men. But what about those gifts? The wise men were said to give gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the Holy Family. Gold everyone understands, but what are frankincense and myrrh, and what do they mean? Well, on a surface level, like gold, they were very valuable products. Frankincense is a natural resin that was usually used to make incense, and myrrh is similarly a natural resin, but was more commonly used to make essential oils. Basically, they were both very precious materials used by the wealthy. But the gifts may have had symbolic meaning as well. The gold was meant to represent Christ's kingliness. Frankincense, which was used by the Jews in religious ritual, was meant to represent Christ's godliness. And finally, myrrh, which was often used in embalming and to prepare dead bodies for their funerals, represented Christ's mortality and eventual sacrifice. Traditionally, it was said that Melchior gifted the frankincense, Balthazar gifted the myrrh, and Caspar gifted the gold. But again, none of that is in the Bible account. Whether there were 3 wise men or 12, whether they were kings or astrologers or priests, what really matters is that their story gave us my favorite Christmas carol. See you next time, and happy holidays.